Well, especially in this market right now, name an engine that you can buy for $1,000 that has the potential NA to make 300 at the wheel or 500 with a turbo, right?
On stock and turbo.
It is hard to argue with a K series. Welcome to the HPA Tuned In podcast. I'm Andre, your host, and in this episode, we've got Pete and Dave from Speed Academy joining us all the way from Canada. Our Speed Academy is one of our favorite channels on YouTube. They cover some really interesting projects, and they have a really down-to-earth approach to their projects as well. They both come from the print media, car magazine background, and print media, obviously these days, it's definitely on the decline. So Pete and Dave saw the opportunity to start the Speed Academy YouTube channel, and they've gone from strength to strength. Really interesting and broad-ranging conversation within this interview. So we start by getting a little bit of background as to how they actually got started wrenching on cars. And they've actually followed a pretty similar path to myself in so much as there's no formal qualifications, which I think is really important for those who are maybe just building a project car in their back shed, just understanding that no, it's not absolutely essential to become a qualified mechanic in order to build your car, build your engines, etc. As well as this, we dive into what it takes to become a successful YouTube channel. And I'm sure a few people listening to our podcast have maybe have considerations about whether or not it's viable to actually go full-time and make a living out of a YouTube channel. And obviously, there's a lot of people doing exactly that. So we talk about the pros and cons of becoming a YouTuber and what's actually necessary and how hard it is to get it to a point where you're going to make a living from it. A couple of my favorite projects that Speed Academy currently have on the chopping board is their JDM Legends series, which covers Pete's R34 Nissan GTR, still one of my favorite cars of all time, and also Dave's JZA80 Supra. These cars are definitely two of the best cars, I think it's safe to say, that ever came out of Japan. Maybe best cars, at least most popular cars. So we dive into what it takes to modify a car that is now also skyrocketing in price as well. Now, a bit of background as well with Speed Academy. We actually got involved with them during their Mitsubishi Evo build, and Dave actually went through our practical engine building course and put basically that course into use when he built his own 4G63. So real world living proof that our courses can actually be used firsthand like this to build an engine by someone who has never built an engine before. So before we get into our interview, just a quick introduction to HPA. If you aren't aware of who we are, we're an online training school. We specialize in teaching people how to build performance engines, how to tune aftermarket and factory engine management systems. We also cover motorsport wiring, and we cover race car setup and race driver education. Relevant to today's topic, I just mentioned our engine building courses, and we have an engine building fundamentals course which will teach you the background theory about engine building, what goes into building a performance engine, and then our practical engine building course which builds on that knowledge and then takes you through a step-by-step process that you can apply to building any engine. Doesn't matter what it is. We've got a full range of worked examples in that course where you can watch the HPA 10-step process being applied from start to finish. Now, if you are interested in either of those courses, we'll drop a link into the show notes. You'll also find them at hpacademy.com/courses, and you can use the coupon code podcast75. That's going to give you $75 off the purchase of your very first HPA course. All right, with our introduction out of the way, let's jump into our interview now. All right, welcome to the podcast, guys. Thanks for joining us. First opportunity, I think we've had two guests at the same time, but it'd be great to get perspectives from both of you individually. And you're joining us at the moment from Canada in the middle of winter, I assume. Is that about right? You got some snow on the ground?
It's very, very cold here.
It is snowing outside. It's probably minus 20 Celsius. we see you in your shorts and we're angry about it.
To be fair, I'd look forward to getting back on the snowboard. So bring on winter, I say. You can always get warmer in the middle of summer. It's hard to cool off. All right, let's actually get into our topic, though. And you guys are obviously fairly well known across the international car community for your Speed Academy YouTube channel. I'm interested in knowing how you got started. So was this born out of a passion of wrenching on cars, and how did you sort of build up those skills? And feel free to both give me some answers here, guys.
Mm-hmm. Take it away, Petey.
Well, I mean, I think for the both of us, this is certainly a passion that's developed into a career. And for me, I learned working on cars through my father. He was always wrenching on ship boxes, and I was there passing him tools, and then that turned into, I hit 16 years old. It was funny. I got into bikes for about 2 years, I think, from 14 to 16. I was like, oh, mountain bikes are the coolest thing ever. And then I got my license, and it was like, why am I even on a bicycle here when I could be driving a car? And I quickly switched over to that, and from there on out, I've always had a passion for cars. I think they're super unique. They're from a perspective of someone that likes to build and likes to tinker and likes to figure out how things work. I think they're kind of like the perfect recipe for that. And I think that's where the passion originally came from. And obviously, like I said, watching my father work on it, and then it spiraled on from there. So.
And to give you an idea of what a masochist Pete really is, because he keeps picking cars like GTRs and 2J M3s to build, it all started with DSMs for him, which is a little bit about Andre, and you know that there's a certain amount of masochism in learning to wrench on a DSM as basically the first car you were building.
But you know why that happened? Because I bought a DSM for $900, a Plymouth Laser, which I'm not sure you guys got, which is like the front wheel drive Mitsubishi Eclipse Turbo. I bought for $900, which of course had a broken timing belt, which at the time, late 90s was what was happening to all these cars because no one was changing timing belts on them, and they thought they were, fast. But I stumbled upon that car, and me and my brother were really into Hondas, and we found this thing, and me and my dad rebuilt this in our driveway with no garage, lapping the valves because they were all bent with the most primitive tools,
polishing compounds.
What you would just imagine two guys working outside with a cylinder head off, rebuilding it, put it back together. And this thing was a rocket ship, and and ironically, it was like the DSMs of the time. They were like the go fast for cheap cars out there, and I was a cheap guy, and partially still am, and it was like the perfect car where I could up the boost for nothing. I got an aquarium bleeder valve, put that thing in, got a crush bent exhaust system built up at my local muffler shop that now I look at and I think, what was I thinking? I was destroying cars left, right, and center. I remember my buddy had a Camaro, and he was the coolest guy in school with a 5.7 liter Camaro, and we hit the lights one time, and I just roasted him, and he was so butthurt. He was so butthurt. And that's kind of,
You learned about the power of JDM, right?
I did. No, you know what? I learned the power of turbo, and I think turbos on 4-cylinders were kind of the DSMs really rolled North America into those cars like that. I mean, there was the Shelbys prior to that, but
I think there's a certain amount of satisfaction that comes from that home built shitbox, as you put it. $900 probably gives you a pretty good indication of what you started with, and there's a satisfaction that comes from turning that into something that actually drives and goes pretty good. And I do think that sort of era of car, and maybe not just Mitsubishi, but here in New Zealand we're obviously spoilt with all of the JDM goodness, and you've got your choice of turbo cars from the late 80s, early to mid 90s. But the great thing about that era was that it was very easy to modify them and see significant improvements in performance without having to spend a lot on electronic tuning equipment, which these days, modern cars, obviously there's still a lot of power available in the likes of maybe, I don't know, the latest R35 GTR, but you're not going to just chuck in a bleed valve from an aquarium setup and up the boost on one of those. It requires a slightly more finesse.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move over to Dave. Yeah, give us your perspective, Dave. How'd you get into this?
I mean, my story is fairly similar to Pete's in that I grew up in a household with a dad who was a car guy. He was building MGs and Triumphs and stuff like that in the garage when I was really little. And then as I got a little older, he got into Corvettes and Camaros. So I was always around that stuff. And then I'd go to autocross events with him when I was a kid. So I was always attracted to cars and I wanted to drive probably from the time I was walking and talking. And then, got my driver's license on my 16th birthday and started autocrossing in my dad's Corvette with him. So I got involved in motorsports at a reasonably young age and tinkered on those cars with him a little bit, though he's an engineer and I'm not, as you would have probably recognized if you've ever watched any of our videos. So I didn't really learn a lot from him about how to build cars. I just shared an interest in them and really a love of driving. And, when there was basic, hand me the tools kit or wet sand the car for 6 hour type of jobs, I would help with that. But I wasn't really doing anything too mechanical at that age. So that came later when I got more involved in motorsports actually. And I realized that I wanted to do more racing. And to do that, you have to become self-sufficient if you're not independently wealthy. And sadly, I had not won the lottery at that point in life yet. So I did learn to do some basic stuff with my buddies in the garage. So I got a Honda Prelude and started doing some time attack event in that and experienced the wonders of VTEC and, became a devout, loyalist to the Honda brand at that point in my life. And all my buddies were into Hondas too, so we were all modifying our cars and kind of learning from each other about how to swap a B18 into an EF or an EG Civic, that kind of stuff. And so I became a decent mechanic. I wouldn't say I was ever a very good mechanic, but I became good enough to do a Honda engine swap on my own. And really, calling that an engine swap's a bit of a joke because really it all just bolts in there. It's a bigger engine, but it just bolts in there. There's
not a lot of welding needed for that.
Yeah, back then it seemed like it was a quite an accomplishment, but looking at it now, it's kind of hilarious that we even call those swaps. But that's really how it started for me. And then the motorsports hobby led to some opportunities to write some stories for car magazines, both locally and internationally. And then I eventually got offered a job full-time working at a car magazine out of the Toronto area here, which is where I met Peter. He was working there as the technical editor. I got hired as a senior writer, kind of writing feature car stories. And Pete was doing the more technical stuff parts reviews or bolting on parts to project cars. And then his role there evolved, my job there evolved too. And we worked there for 11 years?
Yeah.
Something like that. So we had a good run in the print magazine world where we got to, go to all the cool car shows and build a bunch of project cars and, do all that car guy stuff.
Lived through the heyday of, import car tuning. I cringe when I say that, but that's what they called it back then.
To ride that fast and furious wave there for a minute. So that's how we were making our living while playing on cars.
And I guess you guys would have also seen the rise and fall, I guess, of print media. And I mean, I'm guessing to fast forward, am I right in assuming you probably saw that the writing was on the wall for print media and, everyone was moving to online options instead? Yeah.
Well, ironically, the publisher that owned Modified Magazine, it was in Canada, and he had sold to a large U.S. publisher. And in doing so, we already kind of knew it was things are starting to change because he was at the forefront. He always knew what was going on, and at that point, he was buying up forums. That was his next big thing, and forums were kind of on the up and up then. And we kind of knew, all right, the magazine business is starting to slow down, and we certainly saw it. But we rode that wave right to the end, and right. I don't regret it. I'm sure if we had started a YouTube channel 3-4 years earlier, we'd be way further ahead. Mm-hmm. But the magazine job was just, it was glorious. It was too cushy, I think looking back now, and probably at the end of my life, I'm going to think that the magazine job was probably the greatest thing that I've done as a career, and potentially will do so, just because it was there was like so much good things happening. Like everything came together. It was the heyday of like you said, Hondas and just like turbocharging all this, and it was everybody, there was so much money in the industry as well. So we were able to travel, go to events. Like we were going to Japan, over to Europe. I've been, Australia.
Yeah, so. It was the heyday in some ways. But I mean, on the other hand, we're living in an age of access to information like never before. Like when I think back to when I started working on cars, I had no idea what I was doing. And unless I could find people who did know what they were doing, there was no way to really learn. And now you can go to YouTube University, or you can go to HP Academy and learn things which you just never had access to before. So
no, 100%. So, and this is exactly what I lived through when I started STM, my old business. And that was kind of the heyday of, as you've said, the Japanese car, JDM cars, and print media. The forums were there, but they weren't quite as big as they got to. YouTube wasn't really a thing, and trying to find the information, it just wasn't as easy as it is today. So I think particularly those enthusiasts growing up in the modern era, you're almost spoilt for choice. And while obviously, we offer training courses, even aside from those, there's just limitless free information out there. The challenge, of course, with some of the free information is sorting that fact from fiction. And everyone's got an opinion, and sometimes those posting that information maybe aren't the most qualified to be giving it, but I digress away from that. I do reckon, though, just before we move on from print media, I do think that it's a shame. I love online information and the ability to find anything basically at the click of your fingers or a mouse. But, I've still got a stack of old magazines which they've got a different kind of appeal, I think. So it's a bit of a shame that print media did sort of, well, it's not quite dead, but definitely it's on its last legs, I would imagine. Which obviously brings us to Speed Academy, your YouTube channel. And I mean, while it's a slightly different angle from where we go with these podcast interviews, normally I think it's fair to say there's probably a bunch of our followers or listeners who are maybe considering, like, is YouTube a viable option? Can I become a YouTuber? What's involved? Can I actually make a living out of it? So could you maybe give us a bit of a rundown on how you started Speed Academy and how challenging it's been?
Yeah, I mean, we started it because the magazine literally closed. So as Pete said, we wrote it out to the bitter end. And when it closed, Pete was in California at the time, and I was up here in the Toronto area. And we said, what's next? Do we take jobs at other magazines or with online, media companies or PR agencies that work in the auto industry? We both had job offers to go places. So we had options, but we both wanted to kind of keep doing what we were doing, which was building cars and driving cars and having fun with them. So we thought, why not give this a try? We'd seen other online media companies blow up. We could see that there were, YouTubers having success with this content. And to be honest, we didn't really start with YouTube as our focus, though, did we? We started with a website, thinking it would be more magazine style content on a website, and the video stuff would sort of be supplemental to that. But 6 months in, I would say, we realized the YouTube side was getting many more hits than the blog was. So we really transitioned at that point to being more focused on YouTube and less focused on the website. And that's certainly been more and more the case as time has passed. Now the website's kind of a relic of sorts. We certainly had a lot to learn about how to run a business, because neither of us really had any business experience per se. So, things like accounting and incorporating and then like generating revenue were all new to us. But we initially started with, I think, basically a magazine model where we knew companies from the magazine that we'd worked with, and we said, hey, we're starting this thing up. Do you want to advertise on our website, or do you want to send us parts for this build? And so we were able to leverage those relationships from the magazine world to start the business. And that really did allow us to generate some income before we had any audience yet. So we were very lucky that way.
Yeah, I think.
And then, as things grew, obviously it got easier and easier to then make a business argument for why companies should support us with their marketing dollars. So we were never dependent on YouTube's ad share revenue from the beginning. We always had, partnerships outside of YouTube that allowed the business.
Which I think is what made us a little bit unique. Most people going into this situation, I think you just have to be prepared to spend, anywhere from 1 to 4 years grinding it out, not seeing any revenue. And I think the automotive realm is one of the hardest things to get into, only because it requires so much investment of money into, spaces, cars, tools, all of this stuff, right? Like we're not a cooking channel here where we can cut up some vegetables and go to the grocery store and shoot in our own kitchen. It's certainly, and that's not saying you can't start out of your garage. 100% you can. I think that is the lure of YouTube. YouTube has the idea that the cost of entry is essentially a camera and you, and then, you can go out there. So my advice for people that are looking into this is really ask yourself if this is truly something you want to do, if you feel very passionate about video production creation, more so than, wrenching on cars, because there's so much of that. I think that is also a side piece where someone's like, oh, I love working on cars. Maybe I'll just shoot myself and this will spawn into a YouTube career. And, for us, we love working on cars, but we're still, it's like any business, we still feel the stress and pressure of all of the other things that come together, right?
Let's just come back a little bit there, and so you've given some great information so far, which I think is probably pretty valuable to those who may be considering this. So, I think a lot of people kind of get the impression that they're going to start a YouTube channel and they're going to be an overnight success and be raking in $10,000 a month. And the reality is that to get to those sort of numbers, you're going to need a huge number of followers, and there's only a certain number of NMLZs and Amelia Hartfords out there who really have got those massive audiences. And like you say, I mean, you need to be bowing down to that YouTube algorithm as well, doing what YouTube want you to do, which is producing a lot of compelling content that's getting a lot of views. So it does definitely become a job as well. So you need to focus, need to weigh that up. At HPA, we've put a lot of effort into our YouTube channel. We don't have nearly the success in terms of followers that you guys have got. I think last time I checked, you ticked over about 500,000. And it's really difficult making great, compelling videos. We put a huge amount of effort in, and we might get a video that maybe gets 20, 30, 50,000 views, which for us is probably pretty good. And then I stumble on my two kids watching an unboxing video that some 16-year-olds filmed in their garage with an iPhone, and it's got 3.5 million views.
Yeah.
And I kind of shake my head and wonder why I even bothered. What I do want to know, actually before I jump into that, I think what you mentioned there, which is really important to take away, if you're going to go maybe into YouTube and make your living off the ad share, you're not going to get that immediately, which you mentioned. So you're lucky you came into that with sponsorships, which you could monetize. The ad revenue probably isn't going to kick in until you've really built up that audience. So depending how quickly that happens, maybe 6, 12, 18 months or even more. So that's important. What I want to know is, has it now affected your passion for wrenching on cars? Has it become a job? Or is it everything you sort of thought it would be when you got stuck in?
I mean, I don't think it's really changed my passion for cars. No. I think there's ups and downs with it. I think if this was a hobby, right now, me and Dave would probably be taking a month-long vacation somewhere warm and just
going to New Zealand.
Yeah, truthfully, yeah, something like that. And then coming back and working on your car, where we just have a schedule we have to keep. So there's days that you don't really want to wrench, or other things come up, but you still kind of need to do it. But my passion is still there, and I don't look at it from a different perspective. Like if I was doing this in my home garage, I think I would be doing much of the same per se, on maybe less of a scale of a budget that we have, right? I think that's the big difference is when you run a business like this, there's a lot of justifications you can make, and you can, say, well, I'm buying this part, I'm writing it off, or, we're doing this, and it's part of the business. So we go that way. We're at home, I get it. People are on much more of a budget, right?
Yeah. And just the sheer number of builds that we have to do from a business perspective can turn into a bit of a grind. And there's times where, we're not super pumped about a particular job that we're doing, but overall, I still love what we do. And, this was always something we chose to do because we love to do it. And we had that magazine experience. So we knew that we could work in something that was a hobby as a career and still enjoy it and have it not burst that bubble for us. So we came in with that mindset already, knowing that this was a business but we could still, fulfill our automotive passions through it. So I will say that there are times where we would want to do more on a project, where we'd want to go like deeper on it, maybe, sort the suspension out more, or sort the tune out a little better. And because we're under the pressure to get builds done quickly, sometimes we don't get to do that. So that's my one pet peeve with where we're at right now, is that we don't get to spend the time really fine tuning things as much as I'd like, because that doesn't make for good content, or at least it doesn't make for good content on our channel. People don't want to watch that on our channel. So we've had to sort of trim the fat on some of that. Yeah. Overall, I think we're still really happy that we're able to make a living doing what we do. So we're not going to complain, Andre. That's not very Canadian of us to complain.
It really is a great time to be alive if you want to go down this path, because you can make your passion into a career, which is perfect. The old saying, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I've really embraced that over my career. And yes, there are days where I'm doing things that maybe I'm not 100% in love with, but I think 95, 98% of the time, I get out of bed and go to work with a smile on my face, and I really do genuinely love what I'm doing. So I'm very grateful for that. One of the things perhaps I'm not so grateful for, which I'm interested to get your perspective on, is the comments section. And I think this is something that's really spawned out of social media, and everyone obviously has an opinion, and these days everyone's really willing to share that opinion, whatever it may be. And I think that's great. Obviously that's the right that social media gives you. I personally am pretty careful with how I work online in terms of, if I'm commenting on something, I tend to try and treat the comment that I make the same as how I deal with someone in real life. And that's, I think, pretty good way to get by. But unfortunately, I seem to be in the minority. So long story short there, how thick a skin do you have to grow to work and put everything out there on the internet? Does it keep you up at night? Do you cry yourself to sleep with some of the comments, or does it just not bug you?
I think it's one of the most difficult things to deal with, again, in an automotive space, because we're working on vehicles. We're not experts on every car we work on. We don't build a Honda Civic every time. Usually the projects we start, we want to start new ones, fresh ones. So we're learning as we go, and you have a comment section that continues to tell you, you've done this wrong, you should have done it this way. And that just creates doubt all the time, right? And that's partially why we've torn apart an RB26 3 times, because you put it back together, someone says, oh, you should have done this. Okay, so we take it apart, we put it back together, and someone says, oh my goodness, this needed to be done. You didn't do this, your engine will explode. Trust me, I'm an internet expert. And and here's the thing, you don't know if it's a 15-year-old making that comment that just read a bunch of forums, or it's Andre sitting there that's, actually has a lot of knowledge. And I think that's where the biggest problem is. And it certainly doesn't keep me up at night. It certainly creates situations that I don't really like, where again, it's just creating doubt. There's also comments that people just, go off, and I have I kind of let loose sometimes and just, tell people like what you're saying is completely wrong, or say, hey, give me the data, right? Like I just recently, I'll give a really quick example. Someone said stock turbos, R34 turbos on a GTR can make 500 wheel horsepower. And I said, that's incorrect. He kind of said, why did you guys pull that engine? You guys shouldn't have left it. You could make your power goals on it. And I said, no. And I said, please provide me with some data. And the person just kept going back and forth, attacking in every other way. No one ever wants to admit they're wrong, right? And it's just a circle of a toilet spinning downwards until you get to rock bottom.
The comment section is a toilet. Let's just end it there. No. You know what? I think when we first started, the comment section used to get under my skin a little bit if people were saying just asinine things, but it doesn't bother me at all anymore. I don't lose a wink of sleep over it, partly because I don't worry about the technical stuff the way Peter does, because really Peter takes the lead on most of the technical things around here, so he worries a lot more about that stuff than I do. But I also tend not to give people as much credit as Peter does. So if I have questions, I'll usually seek out an actual expert, not in the comments section, but in real life, say by reaching out to someone like you on Instagram or Messenger or email, or we have relationships in the industry. We've been around a long time. We've earned these gray hairs. So we reach out to people who we actually trust and know that motor well.
I think it's actually worth mentioning there that no one in this industry knows everything, and you've said yourselves there, you're not experts on every car that you're dealing with. That just goes with the territory. I mean, no one pulls apart an RB26 for the very first time and knows intimately all the little tricks and traps that particular engine actually has. And the RB26 has more than its fair share, unfortunately. And as you say, I mean, I've had messages from you a couple of times, particularly with that RB26. Hey, someone said this. What do you think? And I'm able to draw from my experience because I have built those engines before. I've dealt with them, I've tuned them. They're pretty common here in New Zealand. Likewise, though, I don't know everything. And when I'm dealing with an engine that I'm not particularly familiar with, I'm fortunate enough that I've got my own network of people that I can reach out to, and the likes of Tony Palo, I've hit him up with a bunch of questions about R35 GTRs because I don't deal with the number of them that he uses. So I think he does, I should say. So I think it's really important to have break down the sort of mentality that we know everything, we're experts, and we cannot reach out for help, because that's just simply foolish. And we're going to advance a lot faster if we ask for help from people who actually genuinely do know more than us on a particular job.
For sure.
Now you've talked about the RB26, and you guys are pretty lucky that currently you're working on two of my favourite cars. You've got a Supra and an R34 GTR, and particularly the GTRs in the US, the R32, 3 and 4 don't appear to be as common as we see them here in New Zealand. How did that come to be that you stumbled upon those two cars?
We had this idea of shooting a video series on JDM Legends, some of the greatest cars to come out of Japan, and we had the hopes of really setting the views on fire. Like, what car would get a lot of views? And we thought the R34 GTR would be exactly that. The really awesome thing about Canada is we have a 15-year import law versus the US, which is 25. So we're able to bring in cars that are 15 years old, which gives us early access to a lot of newer vehicles like the R34 GTR. And 2 years ago, we set out on the quest through our importer, Craig at Bonsai Rides, to find us an R34. And we weren't expecting to get what we got for the money. Originally, it was like a $75,000 to $95,000 car, and we stumbled upon this one for $55,000, which was incredible. And
that's insanely cheap.
It was a Monday night at the auctions or whatever.
So one of the things you've just touched on there is we've obviously seen with some of these select cars, and it does actually appear to be most of the popular JDM models, is the prices are just going absolutely insane. I think there was an R34 V-Spec 2 sold in the US for north of $300,000 US, which just, to me is just out of control. Now, one of the issues that comes with that, though, is if you're purchasing one of these collector's items, I'll call them, or JDM Legends vehicles, does that kind of affect your thought process on what modifications, if any, you can do? Do you just have to sort of store the thing away in cotton wool, never drive it, and then hope 5 years down the track you can double or triple your money? Or is it just another car to you?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what happened with the R34. You know, we bought it at, you know, like we imported everything, landed, I think it was like 70,000 or 65,000. And, you know, that's a considerable amount of money. But at the time I still felt, sure, you can modify the car, play with it. It's not a $200,000 car. And then the market exploded, and all of a sudden we kind of had to rejig the game plan. I'm not rolling fenders. I don't want to put a big intercooler up front where I need to cut the crash bar. So everything was a bolt-on modification. I went as far as buying another engine so that I wouldn't potentially blow up the original engine out of this car. This car came all stock. So I have the ability in the future, if these are $1 million cars, to fully restore it back to original state and put it back to stock with all of the original parts that we have, right? So it's changed the game for us completely, because we're now looking at it like, you know, we are like most people. I don't find joy driving a $250,000 car because I feel like I can't beat on it, like you said. And now it's more of like an investment piece. And with that lying in the back of our heads, we're kind of rejigging and thinking, what kind of cars do we start building where the audience also can relate and say, look, this is a cheaper car, a car that I can go thrash on, I can drive every day. I don't have to worry if I get a scratch on, right?
Yeah, we've gotten some negative feedback about these cars precisely because they've become so valuable. Viewers are like, you know, when are you going to move on to like building some cheap Hondas, because I can't afford these cars, and so I don't really care about them. I can't relate to them. So even though they have this like legendary status, and you know, they're Gran Turismo dream cars for kids who grew up playing those video games, they become so unattainable that I think people are kind of angry about it. And you know, enthusiasts feel like they're being priced out of the market by investors and by people who are speculating on these cars as investments, as opposed to buying them out of, you know, passion for what they really are. So there's been some pushback about it.
Yeah, and I guess it's the usual story. You can't keep everyone happy. And I mean, at the outset, obviously, you weren't expecting the prices to do what they've done. I get both sides of things. We've covered cars that are in the $300,000-$400,000 and more price tag vicinity, and I generally find that most enthusiasts can appreciate them for what they are, even if they know that they're probably never going to have one parked in their own garage. But at the same time, you also have to focus on things that are more attainable and more affordable, so they're relatable to the main market. So it's just a case of getting that nice spread across everything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, moving on a little bit, one of the things you guys are known for is engine swaps, and I've done my share of them over the years. I don't think I was ever very good at them. I always found that they were fiddly and time consuming, but there's a certain satisfaction in completing one and having something unique that does really give you the opportunity to set yourself apart from others with the same model. So can you talk to me about why you'd decide to engine swap a particular car in the first instance?
Let's start with BMWs. We all know why we swap engines out of BMWs and put reliable ones in it, right? Do I need to go there?
Put an engine in with correctly sized bearings. That's where you want to start. That's right.
I fear you're going to be getting offside here with some Euro purists, but let's carry on.
Yeah, like, I think it just comes down to what works and what's feasible for us, for what we need, right? We like to push our cars. We like the idea of building cars that are reliable. And because we're on a schedule, we don't want stuff constantly setting us back with blown engines or, you know, breakdowns and all that jazz. So with the BMW, we swapped a 2J into an E46 M3, and that has always kind of been a dream of mine because I love the E46 chassis. I think it's an extremely well balanced car. The styling of it is so nice. But the engine, even though it's great, it's one of I think the greatest naturally aspirated engines. It just comes with its territory of like headaches and constant maintenance. And after putting a 2JZ into it, it's been the greatest thing. It makes double the power. It actually runs smoother. I don't have to worry driving home that something's going to break. And I think that was the trueness of what an engine swap for me is in that sense. But there's also, like, we did a K swap, a K24 swap into a Nissan 240SX, right? And that was more for like the track.
It's a great setup in that chassis because SR20s, I mean, no offense, Andre, but only a lunatic would choose an SR20 as, the engine in a race car, as you've learned multiple times now. So
the internet has told me in the comments section multiple times that I should have case swapped it. And you know what? I actually don't even argue that point.
We did what you should have done. We case swapped an S14 rather than an FRS chassis, that came with its own challenges and its own issues. It's not the most smooth engine. It puts a lot of NVH into the chassis, so it was rattling things loose like alternators and belts, and so it wasn't. It wasn't without its compromises, but as you know, I mean, a K is the way most of the time. So if you want to make your car more reliable,
especially in this market right now, name an engine that you can buy for $1,000 that has the potential NA to make 300 at the wheel or 500 with a turbo, right?
On stock and turbo.
It is hard to argue with a K series. They are, in my opinion, one of the best four-cylinder engines to come out of Japan. And you just can't argue with the power they can make with the reliability. Back when I was running my old shop, we'd often have a scenario where we'd have a young guy or girl come in with a car, didn't really matter what it was. And let's say that car's got an SR20 DET and it makes 300 horsepower. And they want to make 600 horsepower. So obviously there's two ways to skin that particular cat. We can modify the SR20 DET, and there's no question asked, we could definitely make 600 horsepower out of an SR20 DET with relative reliability, I'd like to think. On the other hand, we could simply choose an engine that off the showroom floor produced 600 horsepower. Now, there's a variety of options there. Let's just say, for example, the 2JZ, because you've put that into your E46 M3. Obviously, a 2JZ in stock form's not quite there, but I mean, it's well proven that with no internal modification, 600 horsepower from the 2JZ, absolutely achievable. So when you're weighing up those options, what sways you towards the engine swap route?
I mean, I think for us, sometimes it's just the idea of taking a chassis we love and making it more what we want it to be.
With engines that we love.
With engines that we love and that we know, that we have an understanding of, we know how to work with them, we know what kind of power we can get from them. And sometimes it's just the technical challenge of doing something that hasn't been done before. Like when we K-swapped the S14, it really hadn't been done, at least by anyone locally that we knew. So it was just, we felt like the right engine in the right chassis, and it would be a fun challenge to try to do it. But we also knew it wouldn't be that difficult because the Ks are relatively simple. It's an older chassis. There's no like CAN bus integration that you need to do like we did on the 2J M3, which was a bigger challenge. So sometimes it's just, pick an engine that you're passionate about, put it in a chassis you're passionate about, and it should work out nicely in the end. And like with my 77 Toyota Celica, I don't want to drive around with carburetors puking fuel on me and needing to be, tweaked all the time. I'm not interested in that. I wanted to modernize an old car by putting a newer engine in it with, modern power levels in it, but not so powerful that it makes the car seem imbalanced. So I put a Beams 3SGE in that chassis because it felt like the right amount of power. It was still 4 cylinders. It was still about the same displacement as the engine was originally in that chassis. And it was also an engine swap that had some support from the aftermarket. So I didn't have to like fabricate engine mounts. I didn't have to, fabricate a lot of it. A lot of it was available from the aftermarket. So it made it a pretty easy choice. And sometimes you do choose an engine swap because it has support in the aftermarket and it makes it much more doable, attainable?
Oh, definitely. We're looking at going down that path with our Nissan 350Z, which has kind of been retired now that we're racing the GT86, and that's going to sat there forlornly. That actually had the SR20 VE turbo engine sitting in it. Long story short, that's why we chose to put that engine into the 86 when we couldn't get our V8 built in time. But that's sitting there at the moment with no engine in it. So we've got a built LS sitting in the shop, and from a handful of different suppliers now, you can buy a full CNC machined engine mount and transmission mount kit to basically make that engine and a T56 trans a bolt into the 350Z chassis, which obviously is nice and easy. I mean, to me, it kind of almost takes some of the challenge and fun out of an engine swap. But if you want to do it quickly and keep your hands clean, it's definitely a viable way of going forward. Now, within reason, if the budget's there and the time's there and you've got the patience, you could literally swap just about anything into any chassis. But some are obviously easier than others. With your own experience, could you give us maybe some of the common pitfalls or traps that you see people fall into when they're considering an engine swap?
I think electronics is the biggest one, right? Swapping engines in physically, I think, is the easy thing. Electronics is certainly, and even more so these days with newer engines, they're just becoming more and more complicated. The ideas of CAN bus and all that are, a myth to a lot of people, myself included. And I think that's always the one thing that people miss in the beginning. But there's just so much resources these days, so many people swapping different things, so many people creating kits, that I think a lot of that has been alleviated for the most part. But I think that's always an issue. And oil pan placement, where we've run into many challenges. For example, with the K series in the S14, we had to build a custom oil pan, and there's just so many of these headaches that come up with that kind of stuff that few people really realize until they start. And if it's been done before, great, pans are out there. If it hasn't, you get there, and now we almost went down the dry sump route, which increases your cost, so much. But sometimes that's the way to go, because you just don't have the clearance, right?
In that S14 installation, was the issue there with the pan placement, was that clearance to the subframe? Or, the K series is a relatively tall engine as well, and some engine bays. Was that the problem?
Yeah. It was exactly where we actually modified the subframe and modified the pan and had a custom pan built to make it all work. Originally, we started with a stock front-wheel drive oil pan and had baffles and a whole thing built out up front, like more capacity. But it wasn't working very well at the racetrack, so we went back and had a completely custom pan built. But now there's, Toge Factory, for example, makes a full bolt-in kit, and you can buy an oil pan. So you don't even have to worry about that, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, you mentioned the electronic side of things, and I want to dive into that a little bit, because I agree wholeheartedly that is probably the biggest challenge, particularly as cars get more complex. You're going to have multiple controllers through the car. So you'll have an engine ECU, transmission controller, ABS, traction control, even for your air conditioning and your gauge cluster. And the part that's really easy to overlook is all of those different modules talk together over a 2-wire bus called a CAN bus. So the problem when you remove the factory engine and factory engine controller, we can fit a different engine, put in an aftermarket ECU or whatever ECU ran that engine in the factory car, probably get the engine up and running. But the issue then is that the CAN bus communication is now interrupted. So the gauge cluster isn't getting the messages that it was expecting. So we've got no RPM, probably no speed. If you're dealing with the automatic transmission, chances are it's not going to change gear. So those are where those challenges really lie. Obviously, if you're building an all-out race car, that's easy. Remove all of those modules, start from scratch, put in an aftermarket dash, and happy days, we're up and running. What are the options? You sort of, Pete, you kind of alluded to some options in the aftermarket for popular chassis. What are those for doing these engine swaps? How does that work?
We're by no means experts, I think, in that area either. What we usually do is rely on people that we know have done a lot of wiring work and integration. So we reach out to those people. Locally, we have NV Auto, Nam, who's there. He's a great wiring help. He helped us wire up the K-Swap 240, and with, for example, the 2JZ M3, we reached out to Mark Panic, who built us a custom loom and then ended up doing all the CAN bus integration for us.
Yeah, he basically went through the manual and built out a custom solution to make CAN bus talk to that motor. And he said he had, some astronomical number of hours that he put into it because he'd never done it before, but he wanted to do it as a learning experience. I don't know that he would ever do it again, but he did make it work, which was remarkable. It really made that swap much more complete because now you've got an M3 with the factory dash working properly and really, like you said, you can always throw an aftermarket race dash in there and drive it around like it's a race car, but Pete really wanted it to be a street car, and for that to happen, you needed to integrate that. But there are companies that make CAN bus integration modules. Like I know Wiring Specialties makes one for the GT86 or the 86 chassis for a variety of engine swaps. So there are solutions more and more where modules are being built that allow you to, make that match between the CAN bus on the chassis side and the engine.
Probably worth mentioning there as well, just obviously we've got a fair bit of experience with the GT86 chassis, and that's a classic example. You've got the engine control module, you've got gauge cluster, you've got an ABS control module, electric power steer, and again, all of those are relying on CAN bus messaging. Just one solution, it just happens to be the one that we've used, is Motec, who make a programmable replacement aftermarket ECU even for the stock car. They went through the work of decoding that CAN bus and all the messages. So once they knew what that was, you can now buy from them their ECU with what they call a 8.6 engine swap package, and that's just the firmware that runs in the ECU. Basically, in a nutshell, it allows you to wire that up to any engine you could dream up, and it will still provide the correct CAN messages to the rest of the car. So the ABS still works, the power steer still works, and I mean, for our application, that's been really seamless. But obviously, that solution isn't available for every particular car.
I think there's a lot of companies coming out right now that are becoming experts. So if, for example, you want to put a Honda engine into your GT86, K-Swap Industries has now a turnkey solution for you, right? If you want to put an LS into your 350Z or your FRS, Siki Manufacturing is coming out. So it's a matter of like, if whatever chassis you're starting with and you want to do an engine swap, go out, search, figure out who is doing those swaps, and that will make your life so much easier. If you're trying to trailblaze, I find a lot of people with the advent of digital dashes, that's what your go-to is, right? Oh, well, this isn't going to work. I'm not going to spend the time to decode this stuff. Let's just wire it up and get the CAN going with a dash, and everything is good, right?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that solution. It's just understanding what those hurdles are going to be. I think the problem is when people get into a project without an expectation of where they're going to get tripped up down the line. And particularly if you're working on a tight budget and all of a sudden you realize that you're either going to have to pay someone thousands of dollars for some custom CAN programming, or alternatively fit a race dash at maybe $1,000, $1,500 or more, that becomes a bit of a problem. So just having a full understanding of what you're getting yourself in for. Yeah, you mentioned about the engine mounts, and I kind of already touched on that. I think we've seen that area explode as well over the last maybe decade or thereabouts, and I think a lot of that has come down to the more easy availability of 3D modeling software from the likes of SolidWorks, Fusion 360, and people, enthusiasts, actually getting familiar with those tools and how to get the most out of them. Plus CNC machining, probably the cost involved in getting engine mounts, etc., machined has probably come down a lot as well. So definitely it's a viable way of performing an engine swap without having to sort of hang off the welder and the angle grinder too heavily. One of the other areas that I just wanted to see what your sort of thoughts were in terms of engine swaps where we may be swapping in a different engine behind a factory automatic transmission and trying to keep the auto trans happy and shifting. Have you had any experience with those sorts of things in terms of the wiring requirements or what tricks you can play to keep everything working nicely together?
We haven't, and mainly because I just don't think there's a lot of options. Like, for example, we wanted to put a standalone ECU onto our automatic JZ80 Supra, and that alone proved challenging. There was only a few standalones out there that provided communication with the automatic, and we're talking about a car that's 25, 30 years old now, and with newer stuff, it's been one of those things we've kind of just put hands up and said we're not going down that road. That being said, I am a huge fan of the emerging technology with the DCT gearboxes that are now being mated to JZ's, Honda platforms. I think that is going to be a next wave. Those gearboxes aren't extremely expensive. People have already done the legwork of, doing all of the wiring into the modules on those gearboxes, getting the CAN communication down. I think that is certainly something. But automatics, and really, I don't think there's a huge market here specifically too for people swapping. Everybody wants to go to that manual route, right? Which is why we haven't really gone there. Yeah.
Other than maybe drag racers, but it's a challenge. I'm sure you know more about this than we do, Andre. Have you done a DCT swap yet, or have you looked into it?
I have not done one. It's interesting you raised that because I did. I looked into it. It was a few years back, and we're at a situation with our turbocharged FA20 powered 8.6 where we could make enough power to pretty easily destroy fourth gear anytime we're at the track. And the way I've been getting around that is I just turn the boost right down in fourth gear. It runs 12 to 14 PSI in the other gears. And when I get into fourth, it pulls it down to, I think, 6 or 7. So it's the weirdest car to drive. You get into fourth gear and it feels like someone pulled an ignition coil off. So you sort of get it into fourth for as short a time as possible, short shift it into fifth, and boom, you're away again. And that kind of holds the gearbox together. So long story short here, we were looking at options. Most people with the 8.6 chassis tend to chuck the FA20 in the bin if they're trying to make a lot of power, and hence there weren't really a lot of bolt-on options for transmission upgrades. So we did look at the 7-speed BMW DCT out of the M3, I think it was the V8 M3.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. Back when I looked at this, and it was a few years ago now, you could get a really low-K DCT transmission for, I think, in the region of $2,000 to $3,000 US.
Yeah.
That is a huge amount of transmission for the money. And what kind of sparked my interest in that was, at the time, there was a company, I think it's in the US, and I do forget their name, so I apologize, but they had worked with Syvex to do a DCT transmission into the Supra, the JZA80 Supra. And they had some video of that on the dyno and driving around. I thought to myself, this is a perfect solution. And at the time, we're running the Motec M1 platform, which we have a development license for. So I did have the ability to do it, I think. I'm not a coder, so what scared me was, one, I didn't really know what I didn't know. I didn't know what I was getting into and how involved the job was going to be. It would have required a complete rewrite with how the M1 ECU also controlled the engine, because with those DCTs, we've sort of got two-way torque requests. So when we ask for a gear shift up, the TCM will send a torque request to the engine control module asking for the torque to be reduced to allow the shift to take place. So there's a lot of to and fro, and this is just a very high level, my understanding of it. In the end, with everything we're doing with HPA, I just decided I didn't have the time to commit to the project without a sort of a guaranteed result. But that was a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now, and we're seeing more and more companies offer these DCT upgrades. And for me, particularly for an older car, getting it modernized, it's just such a great solution. For a race application, the DCT box does come with a significant weight disadvantage, so that's something that does need to be weighed up. But a hell of a lot of gearbox for the sort of money.
We're seeing more and more time attack teams over here going to DCTs, and it's certainly not been easy for them. There's a couple of teams I can think of that have gone through at least a season of toothing pains with it, but I think it's Max ECU out of Poland that seem to have a really good solution now that a lot of tuners are going to. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's what I understand too.
Yeah. Anyway, it's something we're looking into. Pete's thinking about maybe putting one in the 2JM3 because he doesn't love the current gearbox in there. We used a SMG gearbox that we didn't put the manual detents into, thinking that the sort of like spring-loaded shifter that we used would make up for it, but
which is great for race application, but on the street, this is another great lesson. If you're building a street car, try to think about putting everything in that is street spec versus going with race car parts, because things get chattery very quickly, they get noisy, and it's one of those things. Or we're also our tastes are changing, right? As you age, I think you kind of start realizing like, oh, driving around with a car with no ground clearance and tons of camber and solid engine mounts isn't the greatest thing. I want something that I can actually enjoy a little bit more than what it looks like. Right?
Not every car you own has to be a race car. That's true. It used to be everything was a race car.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've seen exactly the same over the 20 plus years I've been in the industry. My tastes obviously have matured. It's a kind of a natural thing. Back when I first started, I wouldn't be seen dead driving an auto. I actually quite enjoy driving our Commodore around as a daily driver. It's just easy and kind of lazy and does the job. But I think more importantly, what I want to come back to on that note. And I see so many people make this mistake because they don't have a good comprehension of what the end result is going to be. Is basically we get a guy or a girl wants to modify their car, and they fit the solid engine mounts and they fit the solid center paddle clutch or twin plate clutch or triple plate clutch, and then they fit the solid diff mounts and they lower the thing to within an inch of its life, and they're still daily driving this car. And particularly if you ever have to drive that damn thing in traffic, stop traffic, you are going to hate your life. So I think it's really important to actually sit back before you spend your hard-earned money and start making modifications to a car, to actually have a really honest think about how you're going to use the car and what you want out of it in terms of enjoyment, I think.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that sort of angle?
No, you're absolutely right. I think you do have to be honest with yourself about what you're going to use the car with. Like, everybody wants to build race cars, but
everybody wants to build a street car that looks like a race car.
That's right. And they'll only ever take it to the track once or twice a year, and the rest of the time they're commuting in this thing, and their kidneys are bleeding and their fillings are falling out of their teeth and they're hating life. Yeah. And it's a lesson a lot of us learn the hard way, but once you've done it enough times, you do realize that maybe you shouldn't be daily driving your race car. And there's ways around it that require a little bit of common sense, and sometimes requires a bit of budget. Like, if you can afford to have a race car and a daily driver, well, then you're laughing, right? You can have your cake and eat it too. But for those of us who need to have one car, you definitely want to be smart about what modifications you do. And usually that just involves like the basic stuff. Put better tires on it, put better brake pads on it, maybe lower it, but don't add a ton of spring rate. Don't put a giant fart can on the back that are going to damage your ears. Have a bit of restraint, basically.
But there's a rite of passage, because we've gone down that road, so we know, we've experienced that. We've had our ears bleed. We've felt our fillings, kind of crack. And a lot of people, when you're young, you don't know. You just want it to look like what you want, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that trumps everything, and you go down that road, and I think that's as I said, a rite of passage that you can take. It does get expensive. For me, if you watch our channel, we're always kind of now presenting this OEM plus idea of like, take your vehicle, OEM did well, now just like make it a little bit better so you can enjoy it, and so it's a little bit faster, it corners better, it handles better, right? Or it brakes better, kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's really smart. I believe that's probably where I'm at the moment with what I enjoy driving. I am fortunate enough that we have a dedicated race car, so we modify that in a different way, and I can kind of head out to the track and basically blow some steam off there and still have an enjoyable daily driver, which isn't sort of modified too crazy. I think the other problem that has fueled this to a degree is with online magazines, forums, etc. Basically, everywhere we look, everyone has 1,000 horsepower out of their car. So
Yes, yeah.
when it comes to enthusiasts getting into it, obviously you look at what everyone else is doing. Well, obviously I need 1,000 horsepower to be happy. And what was really easy to miss by reading an article on someone else's 1,000 horsepower modified car is you don't get a sense of what it's like to live with that car, what it costs to make it. And I would say, particularly if we're talking smaller capacity engines, on the street, probably a well-modified 500 or 400 horsepower turbocharged four-cylinder engine would probably blow the doors off 1,000 horsepower four-cylinder engine 9 times out of 10. It's only really when you get onto the drag strip or the racetrack where you can actually really let that engine, eat, and it's going to come into its own. So those are the things that I think, unfortunately, sometimes need to be learned from hard-earned experience. But maybe if you're listening to this podcast and you're thinking about going down that path, maybe try and learn from our experience. It'll save you a bit of money.
Nobody needs 1,000 horsepower. That's the moral of the story. Who are these lunatics?
Well, but it is, YouTube is part of the problem too, because everybody out there is still, how do you scream louder than the guy next to you? Well, you say you've straight piped your car, you've made 1,000 horsepower. So it is a game of one-upmanship. Sure. And I think that is also, driving a generation of kids growing up with, crackle tunes and fart and pop noises coming out of their exhaust systems that, I find obnoxious and completely not necessary. But there's so many people watching YouTube and see that kind of stuff and think like, oh, that's the cool thing, I'm going to do it, right?
Let's be honest, 50% of your tuning money comes from burble tunes. Isn't that right, Andre?
I have never ever provided that, but I think it's also a modern development. maybe. A colleague of mine who actually used to work for me occasionally flicks me through a screenshot of an email from a customer, and they're becoming more regular. I think I'm getting probably a screenshot a month now, if not more regularly than that, asking if he can provide a pop and crackle tune. Sometimes they even get as in-depth as defining the sort of sound they want, whether that's an AK rifle sound or, I don't know. But I kind of sit back and shake my head, but I also need to temper that with the perspective of if I was back 20 plus years ago,
exactly,
I'd probably be emailing my tuner asking for exactly that. Yeah. So you can't knock it. Again, it comes down to that progression. I just want to talk about power again, because you mentioned who needs 1,000 horsepower. And this is a trap that I fell into back when I was drag racing. And basically I was as an engine builder and I was an engine tuner. And for me at the time, drag racing was the best way of proving myself on both of those fronts. And that was my Evo 3 drag car, which at the time, just to toot my own horn, when we retired it, held the world record for the fastest Mitsubishi Evo 4-wheel drive, 8 to 180 mile an hour. Anyway, the whole time I was developing that car, I had one priority in mind. Let's make as much damn power as we can. And we went bigger and bigger on the turbo, and we did make a lot of power. At the time it was retired, it was making 1166 wheel horsepower, running 54 PSI of boost. That's definitely nothing on today's terms. There's these 4G63s running 1400 plus wheel horsepower. But back then, we were doing okay. What it did was it broke a lot of parts. Mm-hmm. I was pulling the transmission out just about every drag meeting. We'd burn through a triple plate clutch in about 10 passes, And trying to get that thing off the line, it was like walking a knife edge. It would either light up in wheel spin or it would bog.
Yeah.
And when it bogged, it generally broke things. So why I say that is, while we were still racing that car towards the end, we were lucky enough to build an Evo 9 for a customer, and he wanted to beat the Evo 9 world record, which at the time was an 8:34 held by AMS Performance in the US. With that, we went a slightly different path. We were limited on our tyre size for the class we were going to run. So I knew we couldn't just put any amount of power to the ground. We built that with a wider power band, and we limited it to 1,000 wheel horsepower, 1,001 actually, just to be real specific. But what it did was it kind of, all of the issues with consistently breaking parts and being able to get the car off the line just went away. And what it allowed us to do was actually focus on getting the car down the track, learning how to set the car up, learning how to get it to 60 foot. And for those who are into drag racing, just to give some numbers, my old Evo, the best 60 foot it ever laid down was in the 1.3s, which is garbage. On its best pass, it's 8.23. I think it was in the 1.4s. Absolute garbage.
Wow, yeah. And
the Evo 9 that we built, while it's still nothing to be, sort of writing home about, it was every pass on a good track was 1.260 60 foot. It was within a few hundredths every pass. And that allowed the owner and driver to get seat time, and allowed us to actually tune the car. So, sometimes it sounds a little counterintuitive, but less can be more.
No doubt about it. I mean, from a road racing perspective, which is really where my background is, I saw lots of road racers chasing power as a way of going faster. And what they ended up doing was just spending more and more money replacing motors, and not going that much faster for the amount of money they spent, where, had they spent the time and effort and the money on chassis development or driver development, they would have seen much bigger returns in terms of their lap times dropping. So
definitely.
To me, power is actually the last place I look to go faster with, because it generally comes at a higher cost and introduces more potential reliability issues or broken parts like you're speaking of. So I always want to start with the cheap and easy stuff, and a lot of people just want to skip right to the power because power's sexy, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it's the exciting part.
It is.
And it's hard to sort of, it's hard to get excited on an internet forum if you've got stock power.
And I think,
not really.
right, and our videos do exactly that, because we don't, when we built that 2J ZM3, it made, 550 on race gas at the tire or 450 on pump, and people were disappointed. But that car is fantastic on the street because of that. If I had put 1,000 horsepower turbo on it, like you said, it's a miserable car to drive. And I think that is a huge message that so few people promote and advocate for, is where is your power band, right? Like, yes, we're not talking about 6-7 liter, huge displacement V8s that we're putting turbos on and that still can spool up by 3,500 RPM. We're talking about small displacement engines that we're trying to make a ton of power out of, which in turn just makes them make it for 1,000, 2,000 RPM. And then you're left with nothing underneath. But you're still made 1,000 horsepower. Look, I've made 1,000. I'm here. I'm ready to party. I've done my dyno, and then I go drive my car home, and it wants to kill me because I can't really, modulate the throttle, right?
Yeah. Again, all of those things that you don't know until you actually get the opportunity to experience it. Dave, just to your point, and again, like couldn't agree more in terms of trying to improve your lap times in a road race application with power. It's kind of like hitting it with a big hammer. Yeah, it's effective to a point. I 100% agree. I think if you've got a budget to spend, particularly if you're a novice driver, every time the best way to improve your lap times is to pour that money into fuel, tyres and entry fees and get laps. Just get laps under your belt. Beyond that, suspension, brakes, that's really the easiest place to find lap time, but also make your car that much more enjoyable on the track.
Exactly.
And the other bit I wanted to mention here, which is easy to overlook, is if you've got a stock car or a slightly modified car, maybe your suspension setup's not dialed in properly, and maybe it's a little bit of a handful to actually drive. If you go and add another 50, 100, 200 horsepower to that, all that's going to do is magnify all of the evil handling aspects and is going to take a car that was barely manageable in stock form and turn it into an evil handling nightmare. And you're only opening yourself up for an accident, which obviously no one wants. So again, it can be hard advice to take, but time and time again, I see people making those mistakes and get a better result with probably less money and also in less time. So really important for people to take that on board. Right, I want to just ask another question, which is always going to be a very personal thing, but both of you have had the opportunity to work on a fairly broad range of different vehicles. We've talked about a little bit of this anyway, but for you, when you're looking at choosing a car, the modifications you're going to make to it, what is it that you're looking for? What to you guys makes for a really great car?
That's a moving target for me. I mean, it depends on what we're building. Like with the Lexus LS 430 that we built recently, which is why I keep bugging you for more UZ updates on the motor you should have built and put in your GT86.
We tried.
I mean, we built that as a street car that was just meant to be a little bit more stylish, a little bit more powerful, a little bit better in the corners, just to prove it incrementally and make it an enjoyable street car without falling into all those pitfalls that we just talked about by making it too stiff and uncomfortable, or too loud and uncomfortable, or too powerful to the point where the power band is too narrow. So my goal with that build, our goal with that build, was to make it a really cool street cruiser and a highway cruiser, and I think we actually succeeded on that one. That car, I think, exceeded our expectations in a lot of ways. Yeah. It turned out to be a really nice road car. And people are like, oh, why didn't you put a Supra LSD in the rear end, or why didn't you manual swap it? Well, I don't need those to cruise down the highway with my kids on the way to the zoo on the weekend, which is mostly what I do with that car. So,
sure.
Why make modifications that have no purpose? So really, we just kept it simple. We did supercharge it, which, is actually quite simple to do on that car. Not something everyone would do, but you could do it in a weekend, actually. In hindsight, I think if you watched our series, I think you could do that in a weekend. So it's pretty simple to add that extra 80 to 100 wheel horsepower on that car. And then the rest of it was all just like, bolt-on suspension and stuff, a nice lip kit, the right wheel and tire package. And that car was, it was perfect.
So, I mean, really just comes back to what you were saying before, OEM plus. Nothing too extreme in any one area.
Yeah. And I think for me, a lot of it comes down to, building a balanced chassis. Obviously, like Dave said, there's a moving target. We look at cars, we're in the business of creating content. So some cars we choose because we feel they're going to get good views. Some cars we choose because we love them, right? Some cars we want to take to the track. So we constantly have different ideas of what we need to do and why we choose cars for them. But really, ultimately, every build has to come down with balance, right? We have kind of an ethos that we follow, and that's, spend a lot of money on suspension and brakes, wheels and tires, and then look at, doing the engine bay and just don't overpower the chassis. I find I think that's always a good message is think of, 90s and Japanese tuners, they kind of, for me, hit that magic number of like 500 horsepower is such a great number for a car that will deliver a broad power range that will be, fun on the street. That's not going to instantly bore you because it's, 2 weeks down the road, you're still making 500 horsepower and you're like, I want more, right?
Yeah. All right, let's move on because we are getting a little bit long here. So I think we'll move towards finishing up. It's been a great convo so far, fairly broad ranging. We've got some questions that we like to ask all of our guests at the end, the same questions for every episode, and I'd urge both of you to definitely answer. First of those is what's next for you guys in the future and Speed Academy? Where do you see yourselves headed?
Cheaper builds. Simplify and make cars, I think, more relatable. So that's certainly, I think, where we're headed, trying to create content that appeals to more of the masses. We loved building a 2J and at a very high level, that Supra that we built, but it's not as appealing, I think, to a ton of people as it is taking a Honda Civic and lowering it, putting some, wheels and tires on it and
go and having a good time with it. Yeah. To that point, we do have a couple of more affordable Honda builds coming up after these two JDM Legends have bankrupted us morally and spiritually, not only financially. And I like the idea of going back to our roots in a sense. At least my roots are very much in like simple, bolt-on, reliable builds that you can just go and have fun with in a guilt-free way because you don't have your life savings or your grandmother's life savings tied up in it. And I think our viewers appreciate that, but we also want to challenge ourselves from time to time and do something that will, force us to learn some new things. And we do have some builds planned later this year that are outside of our comfort zone to some extent. So we're not just going to do budget, cheap builds. We do have some really cool stuff coming up that will appeal to more technically minded builders, racers, the Andre Simons of the world. So we won't bore you entirely with simple builds, but we will do, I think, more simplified builds 80% of the time, and then the 20% of the time will be more about us challenging ourselves and doing something more technical and something we haven't done before.
I think just on that relatable aspect, it came into my mind when you were saying that back when I was running my Evo 3 drag car, and at the time my daily driver was actually a dirty old KE70 Toyota Corolla. And Google that if you don't know what it looks like. Four-door, boxy Corolla from the 80s. And we had a 4AGE or GZE, the supercharged block with a silver top 20 valve head and a hand-me-down turbo off my old Evo. So it was a HKS GT30 on race gas. It made 500 wheel horsepower, so it was no slouch. Wow. And we would put both of those cars in these car shows all around New Zealand, and they were side by side. And it was interesting to watch because 9 out of 10 people that would come past our stand would spend more time looking at the KE70 Corolla than my Evo. And I think that just literally came down to the fact that it looked like it was more achievable, more attainable than the Evo, which is 100% correct. That Evo at the time was probably, I'm guessing, the cost of a modest 2 or 3 bedroom house, and fortunately I never ever added up the bills. No one wants to.
No, you never do that.
So,
don't do that.
All right, next question. Any advice you could give to a younger version of yourselves? You've had both of you, long and illustrious career. I'm not calling you old, by the way, but you've done a lot of things in your time, and it's not your conventional career path. Is there any advice you could sort of give to young guys or girls out there maybe wanting to become world famous YouTube stars like yourselves to fast track their experience?
Work hard, and just take more chances. If I could talk to my young self, I would just say be a little bit more aggressive. Don't be as conservative with life choices.
Drive fast and take chances, kids. That's the way to the top.
That's right.
No, I would say
solid advice.
Go and learn. Don't just have the dream of I'm going to become a YouTuber, and then, like I see a lot of people do, sit at home and wringing their hands about it and shooting videos and never uploading them, and then not getting any feedback because they're afraid of what the comment section might light up with. I would say just the sooner you start, the better. Just do it
with anything,
and just repeat it, and you will get better at it by doing it. So, I would say stop sort of thinking about it, start doing it, and you will learn by doing. And I think, to me, the most obvious sort of shortfall I see with people that are trying to start their own YouTube channels is they just don't upload enough. They don't produce enough to learn at a fast enough rate to get better.
Yeah. I mean, I think we generally, as humans, don't like to fail. And I get that because I don't like failing. It's not a lot of fun. But when we fail, we learn. So unfortunately, it's kind of a natural requirement in order to actually get good at something. The other sort of rule of thumb is, it takes 10,000 hours to achieve mastery in anything. Yes. And becoming a successful YouTuber is probably no different. So yeah, I think solid advice. Just get out there and do it, and worry a little bit less about failing. And I think we could apply that mentality probably to just about anything. Quit with the analysis paralysis, jump in, and actually learn while you're doing it.
And real quick too, just remember that it does take time to become, successful. And like you said, the 10,000 hours, I think it's one of those things. There's so many people, will spend a month doing something and then feel like they're not where they're supposed to be, and they give up, right? Like it is, the world still rewards hard work. Yes, there's luck that I think plays into a lot of things, but hard work first and foremost is one of those things. And without, realizing that, have realistic goals, you're not going to become a YouTube star in a month, right? Like it's just one of.
Absolutely. It's the old story of the overnight success that took 10 years to get there.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about the 10 years. We see what is supposedly that overnight success, but that's not really what actually went on behind the scenes. So anything that's worth doing is going to take effort, and it's going to take time, and it's going to take persistence. All right, last question for today. If people listening would like to check out what Speed Academy do, follow along, where should they do so?
Well, of course, there's YouTube, and if you search the term Speed Academy, you'll find our channel there. That's really where most of our content goes these days, but we're also on Instagram. Is it just Speed Academy on Instagram? Yes. We're on Facebook as well, and
we have a website. If you actually, care to read, speed.academy, no .com. It is just www.speed.academy. You can check it out there. There's a ton of really good stories. How to K-swap your Honda, how to K-swap.
How to LS swap
how to
your
K-swap your FRS.
Yeah, how to beam swap your old Toyota. Those are probably our most read stories, actually. Anything engine swap related is our strongest content on the website, and probably pretty strong on YouTube as well. But
cool.
Yeah, that's where to find us. We're on TikTok too. I think we've uploaded 11 times, and now we've just stopped.
You're doing some teenage girl dances on TikTok.
Exactly. I'm not good enough dancer, so we just stopped.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll put some links to your teenage girl dancers on TikTok in the show notes as well. All right, guys, thanks heaps for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, and we'll look forward to seeing what your relatable and affordable content is in the near future. Cheers.
Thanks, Andre. Appreciate it.
All right, that concludes our interview. And before we sign off, I just wanted to mention, for anyone who's been perhaps hiding under a rock and hasn't heard of High Performance Academy before, we are an online training school, and we specialize in teaching a range of performance automotive topics, everything from engine tuning and engine building through to wiring, car suspension and wheel alignment, data analysis, and race driver education. Now, remember, you've got that coupon code. You can use podcast75 at the checkout to get $75 off the purchase of your first course. You'll find our full course list at hpacademy.com/courses. Important to mention that when you purchase a course from us, that course is yours for life as well. It never expires. You can rewatch the course as many times as you like, whenever you like. The purchase of a course will also give you 3 months of access to our Gold membership. That gives you access to our private members only forum, which is the perfect place to get answers to your specific questions. You'll also get access to our regular weekly members webinars, which is where we touch on a particular topic in the performance automotive realm. We dive into that topic for about an hour. If you can watch live, you can ask questions and get answers in real time. If the time zones don't work for you, that's fine too. You're going to get access as a Gold member to our previous webinar archive. We've got close to 300 hours of existing content in that archive. It is an absolute goldmine. So remember that coupon code podcast75. Check out our course list at hpacademy.com/courses.